They called it rapid death, and not just for how it tore through asphalt, but for how it nearly burned through Yamaha's reputation. The RD350 was rebellion on two wheels, loud, fast, alive. But now, decades later, new evidence and old wrench stories are forcing riders to ask the unthinkable. Did Yamaha's most legendary two-stroke hide a weakness right in its heart? During the mid-70s, owners and mechanics began reporting mysterious failures, gear oil vanishing, mid-range flat spots, and that unmistakable burnt oil smoke coming from the right pipe. Back then, it sounded like two-stroke personality. Today, we know better. Crank seals were giving out. Pressure was leaking across chambers, and power was dying one ride at a time. Now, here's where it gets real. Some say Yamaha quietly changed part numbers and suppliers without admitting a design issue. Others argue it was just the reality of high-strung engines being pushed to their limits. Whatever the truth, the RD350's glory came with a price in oil, frustration, and faith. So in this video, we're not chasing myths, we're chasing proof. You'll see the model years, the updates, and what really went on inside that crankcase. How the LC and RZ tried to fix the flaw, how the Rajdut 350 carried the torch, and why even 50 years later, this story still splits the biker world in half. The leak that shook the garage, they called it rapid death for how it shredded asphalt and arrogance alike. The Yamaha RD350 once stood for freedom, raw, loud, alive. Every twist of throttle was rebellion. But an expose has torn the legend open. Hidden service memos and factory reports reveal deep-rooted defects the world never saw. According to those papers, engineers had flagged dangerous crankcase pressure swings during early testing. A batch of seals, they warned, failed under sustained heat. Rather than halt production, Yamaha changed supplier codes and pressed on. Overnight, rider forums exploded. The indestructible icon suddenly looked fragile. Mechanics remembered identical complaints: right-side oil loss, mid-range flat spots, smoke that smelled of gear oil. What owners once dismissed as two-stroke personality now looked like a flaw in its blood. The discovery cut through decades of pride. A symbol of independence had become a symbol of deception. Every great bike earns scars, but secrecy corrodes trust. Riders who built their identity around the RD350 now felt betrayed by the very brand that taught them freedom. To grasp that betrayal, you have to open the engine itself and see what was really pulsing inside. The unstable heart. At its core sat a twin two-stroke that breathed like a beast, fast, violent, and unpredictable. The leak points directly to its heart, the crankcase. When the inner seals failed, air pressure wobbled, oil bled across chambers, and the perfect combustion dance collapsed. Gear oil crept into cylinders, spark plugs fouled, the famous rush dulled to a cough. Dealers in the mid-1970s logged wave after wave of these symptoms. Bikes lost edge within a few thousand miles. Riders blamed fuel, weather, or themselves. Now the picture is clear. They were fighting an invisible design compromise. What had been called character was structural weakness disguised as charm. That weakness didn't just cost power, it cost safety. A sudden stall during an overtake, a hesitant throttle mid-corner, moments that froze blood. Each breakdown cracked the bond between man and machine. Faith turned into suspicion. Still, many kept riding, convinced loyalty could outlast failure. But faith leaks faster than oil once truth escapes the crankcase. And while the heart faltered, the company's reaction would prove even more unstable. If this story already has you fired up, hit like and drop a comment. Tell us what Yamaha should have admitted long ago. The cover-up playbook. Inside Yamaha's offices, language became armor. Field variance within tolerance. Customer misuse. The expose quotes these phrases from internal notes that softened panic into procedure. Instead of a recall, the company allegedly rolled out silent updates, new seals under new part numbers, Dealer advisories blaming maintenance habits, circulars urging staff to educate riders on oil ratios. Sources claim engineers pushed for openness, but executives feared reputational collapse. The fix was bureaucratic, not mechanical. Bury the evidence in paperwork. For decades, owners chased ghosts while Yamaha perfected denial. Every polished advertisement of the era sold purity while memos inside spoke of containment. To riders, that revelation felt like betrayal rewritten in ink. Their loyalty had funded silence. The machine they defended in every barroom debate had been quietly edited by accountants. Anger replaced nostalgia. If a company could hide this, what else lay beneath the paint and chrome? The RD350 still gleams in garages, but the reflection now shows cracks. Yet time has a way of unsealing every cover-up, especially when the bill finally lands in the hands of those who loved the bike most. Mid-ride reminder, gear up right. The best helmets, gloves, and accessories are all linked in the description. Riders left holding the bill. Half a century later, the cost has come due. Restoring an RD350 now drains savings faster than it once burned fuel. Authentic crank seals are nearly extinct. Reproductions demand machining to fit. A proper rebuild requires precision tools, patience, and expertise rarer than the parts themselves. Enthusiasts scour auctions and forgotten warehouses, paying fortunes to resurrect the scream that first defined them. The human price runs higher. Veterans of the two-stroke era spend weekends hunched over benches, chasing reliability that never truly existed. Younger mechanics learn from fading masters who still remember the smell of premix and hot metal. In many garages, unfinished RDs sit beneath tarps, half relic, half reminder of promises broken. Yet the devotion endures. Online communities trade schematics, share pressure test numbers, and keep one another afloat. What began as outrage has become stewardship. Maintaining an RD today is less about horsepower and more about heritage, a vow to keep the truth alive when corporations would rather forget. They may have been left with the bill, but they refuse to let history close the account, because Yamaha's silence was never only about profit, it was about survival, and that fight would reshape the entire future of speed. When the law turned against power, by the late 1960s, the roar of performance machines had become the heartbeat of youth culture. But that heartbeat was about to collide with the drum of politics. Across America, the newly formed Environmental Protection Agency began rewriting the rules of combustion. In Europe, ministers debated decibel limits and air quality thresholds. Japan's own bureaucrats followed suit, determined to clean its smog-choked cities. Within a few short years, the world that celebrated noise and smoke decided both were sins. Two-strokes, once the poster child of innovation, suddenly stood accused of poisoning the planet. Each ignition cycle vented unburned fuel, hydrocarbons, and that blue haze riders called perfume. Environmental advocates framed these engines as symbols of recklessness. The same exhaust note that thrilled enthusiasts became courtroom evidence for change. Lawmakers saw a simple fix: outlaw the engines that could not behave. For Yamaha, the timing was cruel. The company had just proven its mastery of small, efficient performance with the RD350. Riders adored it. Regulators despised it. Engineers argued that fine-tuning and better lubrication could reduce emissions, but patience in government offices was running out. Memos from the period reveal a company torn between pride and survival. It could fight for the two-stroke or evolve before extinction. Riders felt cornered too. To them, this wasn't just policy, it was a cultural war. Bikers faced police checkpoints, cities banned noisy exhausts, and insurance premiums soared for any machine labeled sport. The message was clear: the age of open rebellion was over. But Yamaha refused to bow. Instead, it forged a new engine that would silence regulators without killing its spirit. The LC Gamble. In 1980, Yamaha unveiled the RD350LC, two letters that meant liquid-cooled and one clear statement of defiance. Engineers surrounded the same two-stroke heart with a water jacket and radiator, taming noise, stabilizing heat, and stretching performance into new territory. It was a stroke of genius born from desperation. The LC looked sleeker, ran cooler, and whispered where the old RD screamed. Yet when you twisted the throttle, that wild energy still lurked beneath. The shift was more than technical, it was philosophical. Yamaha's engineers saw regulation as another racetrack, a problem to solve, not surrender to. They built a system that balanced compliance with chaos. The LC could meet emerging emission limits while outpacing its rivals. Liquid cooling allowed tighter tolerances and higher sustained revs. It was smoother, steadier, and slightly more civilized, but the DNA of rebellion pulsed within. Riders who feared the end of excitement found a new icon waiting at the dealership. The LC was proof that ingenuity could outthink law. Even the press praised it as a masterclass in engineering diplomacy. Fast enough to thrill, clean enough to survive. But beneath the celebration, Yamaha's strategists knew the truth. Bureaucracy moves faster than progress. Every design that passed today risked disqualification tomorrow. The LC had bought time, not victory. Regulators were already eyeing new metrics, new ceilings, and new penalties. The future would demand more than cooling. It would demand transformation. And that transformation arrived in the shape of a valve that would rewrite the rules one last time. The final evolution, RZNYPVS. 2 years after the LC, Yamaha unveiled its masterpiece, the RZ350, armed with the Yamaha power valve system. The YPVS changed everything. It altered the exhaust port timing on the fly, giving riders a broader, smoother power band without losing that explosive top-end surge. For many, it was perfection, a two-stroke that behaved like a four-stroke until you provoked it. The technology was surgical, elegant, and unapologetically fast. On paper, the RZ350 looked like redemption. It met new standards, satisfied racers, and reignited public interest. But its brilliance masked the storm ahead. Governments tightened emission targets again. Safety agencies campaigned against high-speed street bikes. The same week Yamaha celebrated YPVS, European regulators discussed the next generation of noise and pollution restrictions. The writing was on the wall, even if riders refused to read it. Inside Yamaha, morale was split. Some engineers saw YPVS as the summit of mechanical freedom. Others saw it as the farewell song of a dying art. The company had squeezed every drop of potential from the two-stroke design. There was nowhere left to go without breaking the law of physics or the law itself. Dealers sold every unit they could import, knowing each might be the last of its kind. To own an RZ350 was to hold a rebellion in metal form, a final act of defiance against bureaucracy. It was glory balanced on the edge of extinction. When the West finally turned away, Yamaha carried that spirit to the one place still willing to let it breathe. The escape route, India's RD rebirth. In 1983, Yamaha struck a partnership with India's Escorts Group and gave the world the Rajdut 350. It was more than a motorcycle. It was resurrection. While Western markets bowed to regulation, India opened its doors to performance. The Rajdut 350 brought the same two-stroke fury to a country hungry for speed, aspiration, and mechanical identity. It was the outlaw reborn, wearing a new badge but carrying the same pulse. On India's crowded streets, the Rajdut became a beacon of prestige. It was louder, faster, and infinitely more desirable than the small commuters surrounding it. Young professionals saved months of salary to own one, knowing they were buying a slice of forbidden legend. The bike's arrival sparked a movement, local clubs, drag meets, and midnight rides that echoed what America and Europe had lost. In a landscape ruled by practicality, The Rajdut whispered dreams of rebellion. For Yamaha, the Indian partnership served two purposes. It preserved the two-stroke legacy and kept production alive under looser regulations. The company could still manufacture, test, and refine its beloved design without the political crossfire of the West. In doing so, it sustained a global heartbeat for the RD series long after its supposed death. The Rajdut's success proved that spirit cannot be legislated away. In India, the outlaw found sanctuary. In the West, the same legend was already fading into nostalgia. But as the RD thrived abroad, the cracks in Yamaha's home empire deepened, setting the stage for a reckoning no brand could avoid. Counting the cost. Half a century after its debut, the Yamaha RD350 still roars in memory, but in reality, it roars mostly from rebuilt engines and wallets run dry. Today, restoring one has become an act of devotion measured in dollars and sweat. Genuine crank seals, pistons, and bearings are scarce, and reproduction parts vary wildly in quality. A full rebuild that once cost a few hundred now stretches past $5,000, sometimes more if authenticity matters. Each missing component feels like a small betrayal by history itself. Shop talk tells the same story everywhere. A mechanic in Ohio swears he spent 6 months tracking down a matching left crankcase, half for a 1974 RD. A restorer in Sydney admits he uses 3 different suppliers just to assemble one reliable engine, hoping that one set of seals will last the summer. The scarcity has turned ordinary maintenance into an archaeological dig, and the price of nostalgia keeps climbing higher. For riders, passion has become punishment. What was once the working man's racer has evolved into a rich man's hobby. Even finding a competent two-stroke specialist is a challenge. The old masters have retired, and the new generation leans on online tutorials and luck. Each startup after a rebuild feels like gambling with months of labor and savings. Still, they pay, rebuild, and ride, because the sound of that engine, the crackling promise of rebellion, is worth more than reason. But even the most loyal riders began to notice something darker than the cost of parts. Because for the brotherhood that once trusted Yamaha like family, it wasn't only money that broke, it was faith. Broken trust, angry brotherhood. The revelations from leaked reports spread through the riding world like gasoline meeting flame. Forums that once traded jokes about plug fouling and piston slap turned into battlegrounds of outrage. Club meetings that used to echo with laughter now rang with disbelief. Lifelong fans found themselves arguing whether their beloved brand had betrayed them. The old loyalty that bound riders together cracked under the weight of new information. Vintage rallies across America, Europe, and Australia became arenas for confrontation. Some refused to believe Yamaha could have hidden design flaws. Others waved printouts of the leaked documents as proof. Online, debates escalated into wars of words, riders posting compression tests, photos of oil leaks, and teardown reports to prove their point. It wasn't just about engines anymore, it was about identity. Out of that fury, a strange unity began to form. Anger became glue. Riders who once competed now collaborated, pooling parts, manuals, and experience. They vowed to protect the RD legacy, even if Yamaha itself wouldn't. "They built it," one old racer said, "but we kept it alive." That sentence became a rallying cry across forums and garages worldwide. The anger didn't cool, it redirected, turning into movement. The brotherhood that Yamaha created had matured into something the corporation never planned, an independent tribe driven by defiance. So when trust failed, riders turned their wrenches and took matters into their own oil-stained hands. Fix or fool's gold? As Yamaha turned to modern engines, riders built their own laboratories in garages. Pressure testing crankcases became ritual. Homemade jigs, air fittings, and gauge setups appeared on workbenches from California to Kolkata. Enthusiasts experimented with new seal materials, synthetic oils, and custom gaskets, determined to conquer the flaw the factory denied. Some succeeded spectacularly. A mechanic in Manchester developed an improved double-lip seal that outlasted factory originals. Small shops began selling upgrade kits, complete with diagrams and torque specs Yamaha never printed. Restorers shared blueprints online, proving that community could out-engineer corporate silence. For a moment, it felt like rebellion had found redemption in precision. But ingenuity has its limits. For every success story, 2 failures followed: engines seizing after 20 miles, gear oil bleeding into combustion chambers, rebuilt motors rattling apart because of counterfeit bearings. Cheap reproduction parts flooded the market, each promising salvation and delivering heartbreak. The line between innovation and delusion blurred. In chasing perfection, many spent fortunes on mistakes. Still, even failure carried purpose. The global RD network had turned repair into resistance. Every experiment, every teardown video, every test ride proved that riders could survive without the blessing of the brand. The corporations may have abandoned them, but the spirit of creation had returned to the garage. That defiance didn't just save a motorcycle, it reshaped the entire industry's idea of loyalty. If you love uncovering the truths motorcycle history tried to hide, subscribe now, because the next revelation hits even harder. Lessons the industry learned. When Yamaha and its rivals watched the RD faithful rebuild their legends by hand, they saw something they had almost forgotten. Trust isn't sold, it's earned. The fallout from the RD saga forced every manufacturer to rethink how far engineering could bend before integrity broke. By the late 1980s, the two-stroke was nearly gone from showrooms, replaced by cleaner, quieter four-strokes marketed as responsible performance. The industry sold safety and compliance, but it never sold the same soul again. Honda led with efficiency. Suzuki and Kawasaki followed with reliability. Yamaha pivoted toward refinement and technology. The brochures showed smiling commuters instead of leather-jacketed rebels. The revolution had traded speed for sustainability. Behind closed doors, some engineers admitted they missed the chaos, the smell of oil, the bite of power bands. But regulation and profit left no room for nostalgia. Yet riders never forgot. The RD350's ghost lingered in every sport bike that promised lightness, aggression, or purity. Even Yamaha's modern R-Series carries echoes of that reckless DNA. The company may have buried the two-stroke, but it could never silence its spirit. In boardrooms, they called it evolution. In garages, they called it surrender. Both were right in their own way. The lesson was clear. Performance means nothing without honesty, and legends die when companies forget who made them legends in the first place. But outside the factories, the ghost of the RD was still riding, and it was louder than ever. Competitors rewrite their playbooks. When Yamaha stumbled under the weight of regulation and outrage, its rivals wasted no time rewriting the rules of survival. Honda, ever the strategist, seized the moral high ground. It marketed four-stroke engines as the future, cleaner, quieter, and more civilized. Ads celebrated reliability over rebellion, whispering that true power needed no smoke. Kawasaki watched carefully, doubling down on raw performance, but channeling it through precision-tuned four-strokes. Suzuki took a hybrid path, refining its two-strokes just long enough to bridge the gap before pivoting entirely to four-stroke designs. Each manufacturer studied Yamaha's missteps like a chessboard. They learned that passion without policy was dangerous, that governments could throttle innovation faster than any rival. Yamaha's downfall became a case study in what happens when engineering outpaces diplomacy. Competitors positioned themselves as compliant innovators, turning environmental constraint into a marketing weapon. They promised speed that wouldn't offend city councils, excitement without controversy. The industry, once driven by horsepower wars, became a battlefield of perception. Brochures traded specs for slogans like responsible performance and power with purpose. The era of risk gave way to risk management. By the mid-1980s, the wild pulse of the 70s had faded into calculated calm. Even Yamaha's recovery focused on 4 strokes, fuel efficiency, and image repair. For riders, the shift felt hollow. The new machines were smooth, yes, but sterile. The roar had been replaced by hum. The rebels had become accountants of progress. Yet even as competitors adapted, regulators were already setting their sights on the next revolution, one that would transform roads, factories, and the very idea of freedom itself, the politics of noise and smoke. What began as a fight over fumes in the 1970s became the foundation for global control over how machines sound and move. Emission standards evolved into intricate policy webs, rules governing noise levels, exhaust particles, and even decibel measurements at idle. The same bureaucratic forces that crippled the RD350's era have matured into the noise cameras and electric vehicle incentives of today. Each new law echoes the same philosophy: silence equals progress. Modern cities now monitor sound like pollution. Riders are ticketed by automated microphones that record the volume of their exhausts. Governments justify it as quality of life protection, but to many bikers it feels like cultural erasure. The howl of a tuned engine, once a declaration of individuality, has become a violation of public order. The same language that condemned 2-strokes decades ago now targets anything that breaks the quiet. Yamaha and its peers learned to cooperate. They built hybrid models, experimented with electric prototypes, and turned marketing towards sustainability. Yet under the surface, engineers still chase that lost thrill. They design exhaust notes meant to mimic the growl regulators tried to bury, sneaking passion through code and sound design. The rebellion hasn't died, it has adapted. Still, the lesson remains bitter. Regulation may protect lungs and neighborhoods, but it also edits history, trimming the noise that once defined identity. Because in the silence of modern showrooms, something else is fading too. The people who built those machines with their hands and hearts. The vanishing craftsmen. Step into an old motorcycle workshop and you can feel time slowing down. The air smells of fuel, metal, and memory. But these sanctuaries are disappearing one by one. The men and women who mastered 2-stroke engines, who could diagnose by sound alone, are retiring, closing their doors, or passing quietly without apprentices. The generation that built the RD350 and its kin is vanishing, and with them goes a form of artistry no computer can replicate. Mechanics once tuned engines by ear, sensing the perfect ratio of oil and fuel through vibration and instinct. Today's machines come sealed, their diagnostics locked behind software. Younger riders, eager to learn, often face walls of technology instead of open engines. The craft that kept the 2-stroke alive is now a boutique skill practiced by a few dedicated restorers scattered across continents. In Britain, one specialist rebuilds RD cranks using tools he forged himself in the 1980s. In Japan, a retired engineer teaches small classes on carburetor tuning, passing secrets once guarded by factories. In America, backyard builders live stream their projects to keep the flame from going dark. These are not just mechanics, they are historians, preserving rebellion in steel. Their numbers shrink each year, but their resolve deepens. They work slowly, carefully, because every bolt tightened is a stand against forgetting. And while the craftsmen fade, the world they helped build has turned the RD into something unexpected, a relic, an investment, and a symbol of immortality. The price of immortality. Today, the Yamaha RD350 sits at the intersection of myth and market. What once sold as an everyman's racer now commands auction prices that would shock its original buyers. Pristine examples fetch tens of thousands. Even basket case projects are hoarded like rare coins. Collectors debate originality down to bolt finishes, and every scratch becomes a question of authenticity. The bike that once symbolized rebellion has become a luxury commodity. Behind those prices lies reverence. Restorers and riders see the RD not as property, but as legacy, a bridge between eras when machines had soul and makers had nerve. Each surviving bike tells of defiance and devotion. The same smoke once condemned as pollution now perfumes vintage tracks, proving rebellion never dies. It simply evolves into legend. They called it rapid death, but it was really everlasting life, paid for in oil, noise, and memory. The Yamaha RD350 no longer needs to prove its worth. The fact that it still provokes passion half a century later proves it conquered time itself. And though the engine's cool and the smoke clears, the legend rides on, echoing through every throttle twisted in defiance of silence. They hid the flaw, but riders found the fix. Every garage, every rebuild, every late-night pressure test turned betrayal into brotherhood. The RD350 may have leaked oil, but it never leaked loyalty. Tell me below, do you still trust Yamaha after what you've heard? Tap like if you ride for honesty, subscribe to keep this story alive, and share this with the one friend who still swears by the scream of a two-stroke.